Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the November 4th, 2013 meeting of the Joint Town Council Parking Authority for the town of Los Gatos. First of all, I would ask you to put your smartphones on silent or vibrate if you haven't already done so. And also, if you plan on speaking to us this evening on any item on our agenda or on verbal communications, please fill out one of these cards and give it to the staff clerks over here to my left. Thank you. And if we can please have the roll call.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Joe Przynski.
Here.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Vice Mayor Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here. At each of our meetings, we invite up a stellar student to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And so this evening at this point, I will ask Valerie Howe to come up here and stand to my left, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. I've met Valerie on a couple of instances. She is a member of our Los Gatos Youth Commission. In addition, she is co-president of the Los Gatos High School Interact Club. The Interact Club is an international community service and social club. It is a self-governing, self-supporting club that builds leadership, friendships, and a better community. It is sponsored by the Rotary Club of Los Gatos. She is the Area 11 Director for District 5170 of the Interact Club. District 5170 consists of 13 areas around the Bay Area. District 5170 is the largest district in the world. Youth from around the Bay Area raise funds for annual international project, provide volunteer hours for annual community projects, and provide hours for annual community projects and promote active youth participation in local and international communities. Now, I know we have a number of scouts out there who are getting a civic badge, so as I read on about this young woman, you need to listen. She is a student advisor for Los Gatos High School New Tech. She has played the violin for 13 years. How old are you? So she started at 4. She participates in track and field. She runs the 200, 800, and 1600. She loves singing, drawing, and animating. As part of Amigos de las Americas, she spent 6 weeks living in rural Nicaragua, helping facilitate community-initiated projects and encouraging positive development of local leaders. She says that she is just an average teenager. Let's give her a round of applause. I will now ask you to stand while she leads us on the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Another round of applause for our just average teenager. Ms. Propp, may we have our closed session report?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, members of the community. The council has met since our last meeting in closed session 3 times, on October 24th, on October 30th, and again tonight on November 4th, as duly noticed on each of those agendas. The council's taken no action, and there's nothing to report out at this time.
Thank you. We are now at council town manager reports. Any council matters? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. On October 23rd, I attended 2 meetings on behalf of the town. One was for the West Valley Solid Waste Management Authority, where we reviewed terms of the collection agreement with the West Valley Collection and Recycling contract. and the other was for the Santa Clara Valley Water Commission. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Anyone else? See no one else? Mr. Manager, Manager Matters.
Yes. Mayor and Council, we have a new Art in the Council Chambers exhibit up on the walls, and this is going to be the first of the ongoing series of exhibits coordinated by the Los Gatos Museums on behalf of the town as part of their cultural center that will be developing upstairs and across the hallway over the next year. This exhibit comprises many of the 50 gallery artists that have been shown at the museums and at the museum's gallery on Santa Cruz Avenue over the years. And there'll be a reception this Thursday honoring the museums and the artists who are presenting here tonight. I also have two other introductions. One, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Matt Morley, if you'll stand and stay with me for a minute. Matt is currently the Deputy Director of Public Works for the City of San Jose, where he has worked for the past 16 years. Matt is a native of the Bay Area and started his career in construction and inspection. As a graduate of UC Davis and also an MBA program at Phoenix University, he is well educated, well experienced, and well trained to become the town of Los Gatos' next Director of Parks and Public Works. And I wanted to invite the council to join me in welcoming Matt to the town. Matt brings superb references and a real experience and background in fleet, facilities, innovation, and environmental initiatives from the city of San Jose in his prior career, and he'll be starting with the town on December 2nd, but joining you at council meetings until then. His appointment also gives us an opportunity to recognize someone else who's been working part-time for the town since last August, and since June has been serving as the acting director of Parks and Public Works. This gentleman worked for the city of Campbell for 23 years, 18 of them as director of Public Works. Prior to that, he worked for the city of San Jose, and I wanted to ask the council to join me in thanking Bob Cass for his leadership and support during the last several months and for the last year. Bob? That concludes staff report at this time.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the entire town council, we welcome Matt Morley. We're very glad to have you aboard, and we definitely thank Bob Cass for the interim help. It's been great. Verbal communications. At this point, anyone in our audience wishing to address us on an item not on our agenda may come forward. I would ask you to fill out a card. I have two cards. First one, Dr. Richard Fox.
Thank you very much, Mayor Spector, Vice Mayor Leonardis, other council members. Thank you for your time. I am a physician here in town, a pediatric physician, as a matter of fact. I'm also an attorney in this town, although most of my time is medical. Some of you will remember our old friend Vic Collard. Vic used to tell me that in the 1950s, when he served on the police force of this town, that it was not uncommon for a boy or two to walk up North Santa Cruz Avenue with a .22 caliber rifle on their way out to hunt squirrels. Obviously, times have changed. We had a tragic incident up in Sparks at the school shooting up there a couple weeks ago, followed the next day by a tragic misunderstanding up in Santa Rosa that left a 13-year-old boy dead and a community outraged, and I'm sure a sheriff's department which is grieving also. I've been concerned for some time that in some cases when police interact with the public, that there's the potential for tragic results, sometimes unavoidable, but perhaps sometimes avoidable. The one in Santa Rosa particularly is troubling because it appears to have been, as I said, a tragic misunderstanding that all happened almost in milliseconds. And I'm concerned that our young people, some of whom are my patients, may not understand what is expected of them when they conduct themselves in the presence of police officers, And I'm wondering whether we need some rules of engagement that everybody understands, that the police understand, that the citizens understand, so that there are expectations on each side, and if everybody plays their part, that everyone goes home safely and hopefully with their dignity intact. Obviously, this is a bigger problem than just our town, but perhaps we could start talking about what could we do in our town with our young people to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Lockridge. That's the last card I have.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lockridge, 109 Paseo Laura Court. I wanted to mention today that upcoming meeting notices, and I know we covered the subject not too recently, but AHAS is a subject that residents have signed up so they can be notified early of upcoming meetings. Tonight's AHAS subject was not sent to the people who signed up for this notice until around 3:20 today, this afternoon. With a subject as complicated as zoning, it seems to me that residents need a bit more notice than 3.5 hours to prepare. I know that we recently covered this noticing subject, but I would like to make the suggestion that for agenda items that have to do with either zoning or planning in the town, that residents have a 1-week notice. I find it difficult to believe that the town staff doesn't know at least a week in advance of when either of those two subjects that will significantly impact the town will be on the agenda. If you really want citizens of Los Gatos to be more involved in their community, you need to provide earlier notice. The Friday notice is most often too late for working people to have enough time to prepare. Some of these policies will completely change the character of the town. These same people are working hard to be able to live in Los Gatos. Please give the town residents more notice on these important issues. As long as the town staff knows what will be on the agenda a week away, please let the residents know too. Thank you.
Thank you. Does staff have anything to add?
First, I would like to ask the police chief to meet with Mr. Fox following the police chief's item on the agenda, which will be coming up shortly, and staff will be discussing and apologizing for the late notice today. That affordable housing overlay zone was on tonight's agenda, had been discussed previously at the Planning Commission and General Plan Committee meetings, but the email notice didn't go out today, as Mr. Lockridge indicated.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to do the consent items. These items, which in this case will be the minutes, will be acted upon in one motion unless someone from the council or the audience pulls it from the agenda, from the consent calendar. Does anybody from the council wish to pull a matter from the consent calendar? Seeing no one, does anyone from the audience? Seeing no one, may I have a motion?
Madam Mayor, can I have a clarification?
Yes.
Does this include the October 30 special meeting as well?
Yes.
Okay. I'll make the motion to approve consent.
Second.
A motion by Mr. Brzezinski, seconded by the Vice Mayor. Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Public hearings. We are on agenda item 2, which is asking us to adopt a resolution authorizing the continued use of supplemental local law enforcement service funds, SLESF, to provide funding for 2 full-time police officers assigned as motorcycle traffic officers. I understand that Police Chief Scott Seaman will be making the staff report.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Scott Seaman, Police Chief. The memo that's before you is self-explanatory. However, for the benefit of the public, I'll just say we're in, I think, the 16th year of dedicated funding for California law enforcement at a minimum level for all cities. Ours is at that minimum level of $100,000. The town of Los Gatos, because of its contractual relationship with the city of Montecito, also receives their funding. We use both sections of that funding, both $100,000 amounts to aggregate together to offset the costs of a motorcycle officer or 2 motorcycle officers for the community. And this has been the approach we've used for the past number of years. I'd be very happy to answer any questions and recommend approval of this resolution.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Chief Stephen. I'm curious how the police departments looked at alternatives to spend the money. I know motorcycle officers are very expensive. So were there alternatives considered as opposed to a motorcycle officer?
The law requires that we designate how we're going to use the funds. Some agencies use it for equipment, others use it for personnel. We initially, when I first started with the town, were using it for school resource officers, and there was a time when the town could not sustain that program, and so we needed to dedicate the funding to other purposes. And we felt that because of the unique nature of motorcycle officers and the value that they add to this community specifically, and also an appreciation that Montecito has for traffic safety, that was an appropriate place. We have continued to use it for that purpose, so it's really just a reconfirmation of the intent to use it for that purpose.
Other questions? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. I have no cards on it, but does anyone wish to address us on this agenda item? Seeing no one coming forward, I'll close the public testimony portion of this hearing and look to the council for Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I make the motion to adopt, just wanted to comment on the fact that more and more we see an increase in traffic on our streets, an increase in speeds in traffic on our streets. If I talk to some of my fellow citizens, that's one of the major issues that they are always concerned about. As the VTA chair, we have done an analysis that indicates that in the last year, that is 2011, 2012, in Santa Clara County, there's been a 25% increase in volumes of traffic, 25%. And it's all based on the fact that the jobs are here and the homes are over the hill or up the peninsula. I believe that it's really significant that we reinforce our traffic response. And this goes some ways towards being able to accomplish that. It doesn't necessarily go far enough, and I hope we continue to look for more creative and innovative ways to let people know that they need to obey the traffic laws, they need to obey the speed laws, they need to stop at stop signs and traffic lights. And with that, Chief, I would like to make the motion to adopt the resolution authorizing the continual use of the supplemental law enforcement funds to provide funding for 2 full-time police officers assigned to motorcycles for traffic.
We have a motion. Do I hear a second? Mr. Vice Mayor?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Agenda item 3. Agenda item 3 relates to a town-wide vehicle speed survey. It's asking for acceptance of town-wide vehicle speed survey, introduction of an ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending Section 1530235 of the Los Gatos Town Code for establishing speed limits on certain streets. The staff report will be made by Bob Cass, Interim Parks and Public Works Director. And Mr. Cass, I understand that we do have a desk item or items on this. If you could work that into your report to us. Thank you.
Thank you. I can see it's my first time at this. I didn't know how to put the button on.
It's for a Parks and Public Works kind of guy, engineer, you push the button and it turns green.
Yeah. I could say I'm colorblind and I couldn't see it was green, but that's not correct. All right. So thank you. So the California Vehicle Code requires engineering and traffic surveys to be completed every 10 years to support radar speed enforcement. The previous townwide engineering and traffic survey was completed in 2003. So what we have before you tonight is the update of that, which allows our police department, with its motorcycle officers as well to use radar enforcement of speed limits within the town. Speed limit is normally established at the 85th percentile, which is that point at which 85% of the vehicles are traveling at that speed or lower. As a result of the speed survey, we're really recommending only 3 changes to speed limits within the town, and those are identified in your report, but I'll briefly just review them. The first is on Los Gatos Boulevard. We're recommending, and again, these are all supported by the speed survey, so they're not just random recommendations. We are extending the 25-mile-an-hour posted speed limit north to Roberts Road, so that we can continue that lower speed limit along the Van Meter School frontage as well as the Fisher Middle School area. It's currently would be 35 miles an hour would be maintained north of Roberts Road. Second recommendation is on Knowles Drive on the border with Campbell between Winchester and Dell. There is currently no posted speed limit along that particular street, and we are recommending, consistent with the speed survey, a 30-mile-per-hour posted speed limit. Lastly, on Marchmont Drive, we are recommending replacing the advisory 15-mile-per-hour portion with a posted 15-mile-per-hour portion to make a continuous 15-mile-per-hour section of speed limit on that particular street. There's some minor changes to the ordinance related to street names, correcting spelling, drives to streets to Aves, and those are also incorporated in the ordinance, but they're not substantive changes to any of the speed limits within the town. As the mayor mentioned, there is a desk item in response to some questions that were received by the council. The initial question regarding how the streets are selected for incorporation in the speed survey, or how do we decide which streets to survey. And just as reference, we do survey those streets that don't meet the designation of a local street or road under the vehicle code, and in order to enforce speed limits on streets that don't meet that definition, those get incorporated in the those are included in the 10-year speed survey. We also respond to police department input, citizen complaints as well, and lastly, streets that may also come up through the neighborhood traffic management program that the council has adopted. Secondly, there was a question as to extending the 25-mile-per-hour speed limit on Los Gatos Boulevard all the way to Blossom Hill Road. North of Roberts Road is where Los Gatos Boulevard becomes a divided roadway with the landscape median. It's a multi-lane arterial, and we believe that the Roberts-Shannon intersection provides a good break for the speed limit, and therefore we're recommending that be the 25-mile-an-hour limit point at that particular intersection. Lastly, there was a question regarding University Avenue and the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit that currently exists between Main Street and Mullen, and whether or not that might make sense to extend that north to Highway 9. And when we took a look at that, we do think that might have merit. Unfortunately, the data that we have looks at Mullen all the way to Blossom Hill Road, so that's a long stretch of about 4,400 feet, and we need to go back and see if we can disaggregate the data and look at that section from Mullen to Highway 9 to see if we can't perhaps look at supporting a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit on that stretch. But we think that does have some potential merit because it is very similar to the downtown area. There's a lot of cross streets, the fire station, and a lot of activity in that area. So with that, I'll answer any questions. The town's traffic engineer, Jesse Poo, is here to answer any questions that I might not be able to respond to.
Thank you. Questions of Mr. Cass? Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Cass, I was the one who gave you the question about the proposed change on Los Gatos Boulevard, and it's not, you haven't persuaded me because it doesn't make sense to me from just a logical point of view. I totally agree with having it 25 miles per hour past the school and up to Roberts Road. From Roberts Road to Blossom Hill on Los Gatos Boulevard is one long block. So it doesn't make sense to me to change the speed limit for one long block, that's where the driveways are for Taco Bell for entrance to Kings Court. You've got Acura dealership on the other side. So again, just from a common sense public point of view, to have consistency up to the main cross street and then start a new speed limit on the other side makes more sense to me. So can you argue me out of it?
I'm not sure I would try and argue you out of it. And again, I might defer to Jesse as to what the section we studied under the traffic survey is. We can't change speed limits just based on, you know, what we feel and think. They have to be supported by the survey results. Again, we looked at that street section. It is multi-lane. It is an arterial, and it's not so much as changing the speed limit for one block. Again, think of coming southbound. It's 35 miles per hour on Los Gatos Boulevard. You're in this multi-lane commercial area with a divided median, with a landscape median. So you're coming southbound. When you hit that Roberts-Shannon Road intersection, the nature of the street changes, and that's where it goes down to 25. So maybe I look at it going southbound, and you look at it going northbound. Going northbound, kind of the same thing as when you cross over the Shannon-Roberts is when it opens up and it becomes divided, and that's where the break point for 35, and that's where the decision was made. And again, Jesse, if you have anything to add to that, be glad to have him add additional information.
We try to maintain the same posted speed limits for roadway that has consistent uniformity in the physical roadway condition. And Los Gatos Boulevard north of Roberts has 2 to 3 lanes each direction, and more consistent with Los Gatos Boulevard north of Blossom Hill Road. And south of Roberts Road, it starts narrowing down in the southbound direction, turns into from 2 to 1 lane, and so that's how we selected.
Mr. Larson?
The purpose of the ordinance you're adopting is to set the speed limits for various streets as required by state law so that traffic enforcement can occur and be maintained. What I would recommend is, if the council is interested in staff further exploring the north of Roberts Road section of the boulevard, would be to include that in the Mullen referral to see if we even have the data that supports a different traffic speed limit in that portion of the road. Because if we were just to change the speed limit without these survey data to support it, then it would hamper law enforcement and speed enforcement on that section of roadway until there was speed survey data that supported it.
Ms. McNutt?
Yeah, I would like to recommend then, if that's the direction that council goes on both of these, to look at it and see if it's possible. Because again, no matter whether you're coming south or north, I would actually prefer that people start slowing down as soon as they cross Blossom Hill and start entering into that residential neighborhood. And when they're going north, to think that you're at 25 and you cross Shannon and then you push down the accelerator and you get up another 10 miles per hour for a block and then come to a light. So again, I'm doing it from a public common sense point of view and not from a traffic engineer's point of view, which I know they think differently. But I would be okay if we could explore it further with the other one on University.
Further questions? Mr. Leonardis?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So the process this evening will be, we have this resolution in front of us, and we will be revisiting the other two, the University between Mullen and Main and the Los Gatos Boulevard later. That'll be coming back.
And what staff was referencing for Mullen that we would extend to this other portion is to see if the traffic survey broke out those segments and provide data that support traffic enforceable lower speed limits. The risk is, as identified in the staff report, is if you adopt a speed limit that isn't reflective of the 85%, it makes traffic enforcement less valuable and meaningful on those sections of roadway. So if the 85% speed percentage on either University north of Mullen or the boulevard north of Roberts Road didn't support the lower speed limit, we would not recommend it because of the impacts on traffic enforcement, not simply from a traffic engineering point of view.
Yes?
Thank you. So that'll be coming back at a later time after the data has been reviewed?
Correct.
Thank you.
Following up on that, do you have a time frame?
We should be able to do that within a couple months. I mean, it shouldn't take that long. We need to look at how the data was collected, and if we do have some additional funding left in the contract with the traffic survey consultant, we could even go out and do some counts or do some radar speed counts for those little sections that we're talking about. So first thing is to look at how it was collected, if it can be disaggregated. Second thing is to see if we could collect some additional data and what we would then be able to bring back as a recommendation.
Thank you. Other questions of staff? Mr. Brzezinski.
Just want to clarify, the motion tonight would be to accept, to approve, to move forward, and then to study, not to continue this.
I don't, again, I defer to the town manager, but I don't think we need a motion to bring those other two. We're going to do that. We're going to look at those two sections, the Blossom Hill to Roberts section of Los Gatos Boulevard and the section of University. So we'll just do that. We'll advise the council of the results of that, and if it warrants bringing forward with another ordinance introduction and amendment, we'll move forward with that as well. So again, tonight it's accepting the traffic study and introduce the ordinance for first reading so we can move forward with enforcing what we do have. All right, and then just to clarify the University segment, it's Mullen to 9 or it's Mullen past 9? We believe Mullen to 9, but we can also, that's the section I believe that was in question. We could also look at north of University to Blossom Hill as well. There's a lot of commercial activity in that portion as well.
I would recommend that we include that as well, because there have been a lot of comments from our neighbors up there that say that speeds pick up pretty drastically when people go on to University off of 9 to northbound.
And again, if the speeds pick up dramatically, then the likelihood is we're not going to be able to establish a lower speed limit because the predominant speeds are higher. But we'll look at that information.
Yeah.
So with regard to that, University would be examined from Mullen to Highway 9 and then Highway 9 to some other
correct.
area
And we'd do that in two separate portions so that if we have the opportunity to put in a lower speed limit based on survey data, we would do that.
Thank you. Excuse me. Any other questions of staff? All right, this is a public hearing. I do not have any cards, but does anyone in the audience wish to address us on this agenda item? Seeing no one coming forward, I'll look to the council for a motion. Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you.
No, you're not Mr. Brzezinski. You're Mr. Vice Mayor Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I move to accept the 2013 Townwide Vehicle Speed Survey, and the clerk has to read the ordinance.
Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending Section 15.30.235 of the Los Gatos Town Code for establishing speed limits on certain streets.
Further move to waive the reading of the ordinance and move to introduce the ordinance amending Section 15.30.235 of the Town Code establishing speed limits on certain streets.
Second.
We have a motion by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Mr. Brzezinski. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Cass. Agenda item 4. This is an introduction of a general plan amendment to include the affordable housing overlay zone sites in the housing element, technical appendix housing sites inventory, amending the town code to incorporate the affordable housing overlay zone into Division 5, Article 7 of overlay zones and historic preservation, adoption of affordable housing overlay zone, design guidelines, and application of an affordable housing overlay to 5 properties generally located at A, Knowles Drive, B, Los Gatos Lodge, C, Los Gatos Lodge, D, Higgins Business Park, and E, Los Gatos Oaks Apartments. Staff report. Oh, that's going to be done by Mr. Ordonez. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Erwin Ordonez for Community Development. First off, I'd like to address the comments made regarding the notice and express an apology on behalf of the Community Development Department regarding the courtesy notice. And I also wanted to clarify for the public and the council that the actual notices, the legal notices that were mailed out for the radius were done properly, as were the newspaper notices that were prepared. And in this particular instance, staff continued the practice of the Planning Commission expanded notice at 500 feet radius rather than the 300-foot legal requirement. What staff has been doing for the General Plan Committee since the General Plan Committee notices for AHAS, is to continue a practice of providing a courtesy notice immediately when the distribution of the packet materials have gone out on Friday. And that's the thing that was not done in this particular instance. It was that courtesy notice of the availability of the staff report. So it wasn't the legal notices of the meeting, but rather the availability of the staff report that was not provided. And as soon as we discovered that this afternoon, we went ahead and provided a notice to the group. And as a result of the notice that was provided, we actually got 2 correspondences. We had an email from an outside special group that raised issue with some suggestions to improve. And then we also got a response from a property owner that thanked us for the notice. And the staff report helped clarify the information and their stance with regards to their particular property and the AHAS. In terms of the presentation for this evening, I'd like to go ahead and continue. As you noted, there are 3 items that are before you in terms of approval for this evening. Actually 4 with the environmental. There's the general plan amendment, the zoning ordinance amendments that include text amendments to the zoning regulations, and there's the affordable housing design guidelines. The 4th item is the environmental impact addendum. As background, just wanted to provide you a little bit of information. This was last before council in January after being developed by the General Plan Committee and Planning Commission in 2012. And the prior AHAS that came before council consisted of 5 overlay sites. There were the Los Gatos Courthouse, the north part of town. There was a South Bay development parcel along Knowles, and then there were 3 sites on Oka Road, one of them being single-family designation and then 2 multifamily. At that point in time, when AHAS was proposed, the density ranges were between 20 to 30 dwelling units per acre, and on top of that, there was availability for additional density bonuses and 4 developer concessions. The AHAS as originally proposed was developed with a capacity of 621 units and was put together to address a regional housing needs allocation of 562 units with a housing production or unmet need of 452 units. In January, council reviewed the AHAS. As a result of council's review and the extensive public testimony, council remanded the item back to the General Plan Committee to reconsider the 41 original sites looked at in 2010, and to also provide additional traffic and school information regarding any new sites. And council also directed staff to provide additional outreach to adjacent neighbors of the selected sites. The General Plan Committee has been meeting since February of this year. They reviewed not only the 41 sites, but as part of the public comments, there were 11 sites suggested by the public. The General Plan Committee actually looked at those as well. On May 8th, the General Plan Committee reached a consensus regarding 5 sites. And on the next slide, I'll go over the committee recommendation. There we go. The General Plan Committee recommendation of the Planning Commission Council was to basically provide 5 new sites. As part of the committee work, the committee also was able to document the housing production that has occurred since 2009. When the housing element was put together in 2009, staff was able to estimate the number of housing units that were produced and that led to the unmet housing need of 452 units. Since February, the first part of the General Plan Committee's review, staff was able to document with the committee the housing production that's occurred, and we were able to reduce the unmet housing need to 346 units. So in addition to the 4 new sites, there was actually a lower target that the General Plan Committee was planning for. And then as part of the General Plan Committee review, there was a recommendation to delete 4 sites. The committee recommended to delete the Los Gatos Courthouse as well as the 3 Oka Road sites, and they recommended addition of 4 new sites. The result of that was better geographic distribution. So the committee recommended retaining the South Bay development parcel on Knowles Drive, and that's a site on the, in the north part of town, and 2 new parcels on Blossom Hill Road. There's the Higgins Business Park, as the mayor noted, and the Los Gatos Oaks Apartments. And then there are 2 new sites in the south part of town, which are located on the Los Gatos Lodge site, so 2 of the 3 lodge sites. As part of the General Plan Committee work, the General Plan Committee looked at the development standards and concessions, and the committee chose to limit densities to a maximum of 20 dwelling units per acre, which is the bare minimum that the State Housing Community Development Department will accept for a suburban community like Los Gatos. The committee also chose not to include any density bonus in the recommended developer concessions. And the sites chosen by the committee are planning for a capacity of 428 units, which is 193 units less than what was planned for with the original AHAs. Next slide. In terms of the 5 sites themselves, I'd like to just take a few minutes to just go through and have the council familiarize themselves with the sites. The first slide before you is the South Bay development parcel, which is the larger parcel near the creek there. It's 7.4 acres. It has an existing general plan designation of high density residential. So the density recommended there is consistent with the AHA's density recommended by the committee of 20 dwelling units per acre. And this would have a capacity of 148 units on the site. Next slide, please. This site is the Higgins Business Park site on 400 Blossom Hill Road. It's 3.2 acres. It's the lower arrow to the left there. The site is fairly flat with the exception of the eastern portion of the site, and it can accommodate an additional 64 units. It has a general plan designation and zoning for office. Residential is allowed on that in that designation with a conditional use permit. There have also been past proposals for residential uses on the site. Next slide. The adjoining site is the arrow to the right. This is the Los Gatos Oaks Apartments. This is a site that has additional capacity based on the existing density. And the designation for the site in the general plan is 5 to 12 dwelling units per acre. And there are 30 units existing on site. Based on the AHA's density that's being recommended, an additional 46 units could be accommodated on the site. Next slide. And then the last slide basically reviews the Los Gatos Lodge parcel, which is 8.5 acres total. There's a 7-acre parcel and a smaller 1.5-acre parking lot parcel. The general plan designation for the site is mixed-use commercial. Residential is allowed as a mixed-use application on the site. As recommended, 20 dwelling units per acre in the AHAs is proposed, and that would accommodate 170 units total for the site. This pretty much concludes the review of the AHA sites, and I'd like to go over the recommended actions for the council. As the mayor noted, the Planning Commission had a recommendation for approval, and that's attachment 3 in your report. There is a general plan EIR, and given the recommendation of the General Plan Committee and Planning Commission for lower density development, it was appropriate to adopt an addendum which notes that there aren't any significant impacts beyond those that were considered in the original 2010 General Plan EIR. There's a resolution for the actual General Plan amendment, which is actually amending 2 exhibits in the technical appendix of the housing element. There's a map exhibit and a table that designate the affordable housing overlay zone sites, so that's that particular change. Staff is recommending that council make the findings for the zoning code amendments, that the zoning code amendments are basically consistent with the general plan and its elements. Next slide. And then the second half of the recommendations is that staff is recommending that the council introduce the zoning ordinance amendment, attachment 5 of your report, make the findings that the zoning code map changes, which is the actual designation of the 5 overlay zones on the individual parcels, and that those amendments are consistent with the general plan and the elements. And council is recommended also to introduce the 5 ordinances applying the overlay zones to those sites. And staff is recommending the council waive the reading of the amendments and to introduce the ordinance for the zoning code amendments in your attachment. And then the last recommendation is actually to adopt the resolution approving the affordable housing overlay zone guidelines, which is attachment 12. And that concludes staff's presentation. I also wanted to note that there was a desk item, that there was a couple of questions from council over after the staff report was prepared on Friday regarding correspondence that was received from a resident, Lee Quintana. Ms. Quintana had some questions regarding the timing of the required implementation for AHAWS. As a reminder to council, these were required by the state certified housing element, and they have to be done within this planning period. And that concludes on December 31st. So that would include the general plan amendment, the zoning, the sites designations, and then the housing element also calls for development of the affordable housing guidelines in this planning period as well. In terms of the correspondence, there was also a question regarding the definition of significant component for affordable housing with any particular project. The guidelines in the introduction talk about the intent being that they be used for a project that had a significant component of affordable housing. It was not defined in the guidelines. It is also not defined in the zoning and ordinance amendments. Staff at the desk item is recommending 3 possibilities if council wants to set a definition for significant component. And those 3 components are possibly a project that exceeds the town's below market price inclusionary zoning requirements, which are typically 10 to 20% of the total units in a project. The second one being a project that has requested a density bonus as part of the town's density bonus ordinance. And those would be projects that propose between 20 to 35% affordable housing as part of the mix of a project. The third being the AHAWS, which is defined as having more than 50% of a project as affordable. The other items that were raised as part of the correspondence include the density bonus concessions not being included or noted in AHAWS, while the recommendation not being included in the staff recommendation. The writer was basically assuming that council was going to adopt the density bonus as recommended, but what we prepared for council this evening did not make that assumption, since there is a deliberative process as part of the public hearing. We also noted that there is a revised resolution that was provided as part of your packet, that if council did adopt that recommendation, the resolution authorizes staff to make changes to the exhibit to make it consistent with the zoning. So if council chose not to include the density bonus as recommended by the General Plan Committee and Planning Commission, that is already incorporated in that resolution. Staff would make that change prior to the distribution of the AHAWS guidelines. The other items that were included in the correspondence that was received included references to setbacks. And the resident had a desire that the specificity of setbacks, having a numeric setback, also be included in the guidelines. Staff had corresponded with the resident, informing them that the zoning ordinance is actually the thing that sets the legal framework for the entitlements, and that's the thing that actually has the setbacks. And so the zoning ordinance that is in front of council tonight actually has numeric sort of hard targets in terms of setbacks. The guidelines are just that. They're guidelines, and they reference things like landscape buffers, so there aren't specific setbacks for all the sites included. The zoning and general plan actually set up the entitlements, and the zoning actually establishes the building envelope with the required yards. So staff feels that there should be no changes to the affordable housing design guidelines. The fifth item that was basically discussed by the resident that wrote in was that noting that the General Plan Committee, when it drafted the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone last year, and the General Plan Committee this year, did not change or look at how the terms standards or guidelines were used in the documents. If you look at the document, they're used interchangeably in some of the sections. And if council would like to have consistency as part of the staff authorization to make changes, we can include that. Or alternatively, if council would like to see changes, staff can bring back those changes regarding the design guidelines for your next meeting in December. And that concludes staff's presentation. I'm available for comments and questions.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions of staff? Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Ordonez, thank you very much for all of your work on this project. I know it's been a long time. I'm just want to understand, I know that we're going into a 2014 now housing element cycle, and I want to, and that we are considering adopting what's before us tonight to essentially keep our promise to the state housing with respect to what we said we were going to do with our adopted housing element so that it's certified. If we go ahead and do that, where does that leave us going forward for 2014? Are we going to do it all over again and come back with 5 more sites? I know we discussed this at length at General Plan, but can you just explain to me how that's going to work?
Certainly. There's actually an advantage for the council and the town that goes beyond just keeping our word regarding the housing element. There's actually penalties that are in place that if we don't follow through with the adoption of the implementation item during this current planning period, the numbers that we were talking about, the unmet RHNA, those 346 units that we documented, actually roll forward into the next housing element period that starts in January. And they get added to the numbers that ABAG is coming up for the town. So rather than planning for an additional 619 units, we're going to have to plan for just shy of 1,000 units. Additionally, in the statute for housing elements, there's a requirement that says any unmet need by a jurisdiction that's not addressed during the current planning period, the town has within a year of the next planning period, we actually have to rezone properties. It can't just be an overlay. We actually have to rezone for those 346 units. So there's some pretty hefty penalties that are related to this. The other benefit of adopting the AHAS now is that with the AHAS in place, we actually get to take credit for those 346 units and actually move that credit forward into the next housing element cycle. So instead of having to sort of rewrite the book again for 619 units, we'd have to plan for the delta between the 619 and 346 units. So there's an advantage to doing this year.
Other questions? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. So just to clarify, the next housing cycle starts in 2014 and it ends when?
8 years later, 2022.
Thank you.
Other questions? First of all, thank you. You've done great work. And listening to the Planning Commission on this, I agree with Ms. Sayak that those of us who are on the General Plan Committee, sometimes when you're doing this for years and you're with all this detail, sometimes you lose the bigger picture. And also with Mr. O'Donnell, who had a challenge getting a lot of information from a speaker without a letter or some kind of memo. And so since we the council, subsequently received that memo, I'm the one who raised issues, and I just want to clarify them with you. The significant component issue raised by Ms. Quintana and also by me means that if you have one of the designated sites, it may not be developed under AHAS at one time. Is that accurate?
I believe the issue that Ms. Quintana had was that she wanted to know when the AHAS design guides could actually be used by what type of project. And so her sort of question was, well, could a project of 20 with 20% affordable housing utilize the design guidelines. If you remember from your work on the General Plan Committee, the guidelines are actually broken up into sort of three parts. There's the housing types portion of the guidelines, there's some standards, and then there's actually site-specific criteria. And obviously the site-specific criteria would not be appropriate, but there may be portions of the guidelines, as Councilmember Jensen noted in January, where you have you have housing types that are included there that the town does not currently have any standards for. So conceivably, if you had a project that came in, let's say for a density bonus ordinance request, it may be appropriate to use the AHA's design guidelines, at least for housing types and some of the standards in that particular instance, when the Planning Commission or Council reviews that application. So at least you had some sort of benchmark to be able to hold that project to. Without the guidelines, you wouldn't have any other benchmark right now besides the zoning and the regular residential guidelines that the town has.
Okay, thank you. And as I also understood what you said and what we have in our desk item, the specificity, using setbacks as an example, the specificity of the zoning ordinance would trump any generality in the design guidelines.
That's correct.
And with regard to the shall versus should, standards versus guidelines issue, again, if I understand what you're saying, there might indeed be inconsistency in our documents, and that's something that we could just send back to staff, even though we may pass on, we may approve everything else this evening?
Yes, in terms of the council's comfort level, the alternative would be to have staff look at this and actually bring back the guidelines with some proposed changes to address those specific sections and to bring those back to you in December.
Would you just be bringing back the guidelines and have everything else move forward?
Yes.
Okay, good answer, thank you. Any other questions? All right, this is a public hearing. And I don't have any cards asking to speak to agenda item 4 except for the one that just came in. And I have a feeling I have another one that's coming in. Okay. All right. So if you want to speak on this agenda item, please submit one of these cards. We have 2 now. Matthew Hudes.
Hello, council members. Matthew Hudes, 16631 Madrone Avenue. I just wanted to disclose I was a member of the General Plan Committee, had the opportunity to work on this over the last 2 years or so. And I have to tell you, it's been a remarkable process of local democracy, seeing the direction go one way and then take another turn with input from the town. I want to thank the members of the community that spoke up and got us going in a direction that I think was more appropriate. Particularly Mr. Lockridge, Mr. Hadar, who were very helpful in getting our attention, and the leadership of John Bourgeois in the committee, getting an open process that was flexible and accommodated, I think, a better outcome. And particularly Mr. Ordonez, who provided expertise and did his homework and research on the topic, was very helpful. So I want to point out that when we did the restart on this, we looked at 4 criteria that I think helped guide our thinking. Number 1, is this consistent with the goals of the state? Number 2, is it a reasonable distribution of sites across the town? Number 3, is this minimizing the impacts on schools and roads? And number 4, does it have a reasonable chance of getting built? And so we use those as criteria, and I would suggest that you consider those as well. So, you know, the process was, I thought, very encompassing of local input, and I was very supportive of the way we ended up on this. We have limited it to 20 units per acre across all sites, and I recommend that we continue that. And one minor item was that the lodge site called for access to the high school with a road or pedestrian access, and I suggest that we make sure to explore that with the high school and make sure they're informed of that. Thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you. John Shepherdson.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Vice Mayor Leonardis and council members. I have a question, and maybe it's a silly question, but I'm looking at this resolution, and I think of the other projects like Swanson and Albright, and I realized that with those projects there was no general plan amendment, and what we're dealing with here is a general plan amendment, and it would be helpful to me if there could be an explanation as to why we're having a general plan amendment for this proposal and not with the other projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address us on this agenda item? Seeing no one rushing forward, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing and turn to the council for motions, questions, discussions. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I was going to make a motion to move ahead with the staff's recommendation on this. On page 2 of the staff report, items 2 through 10 and all applicable attachments. I am interested in hearing an explanation on Mr. Shepherdson's question, but my motion would be from the staff, but my motion would be to move forward to approve items 2 through 10 on page 2 of the staff report and all applicable attachments.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that. I would like clarification from the attorney, however, whether or not we can do it as an omnibus motion without going through individual items.
Since there is a recommendation and some of these are ordinances, there does need to be motions regarding the waiving of the reading of the ordinances and reading of the titles of the ordinances. So you could do it as an omnibus so long as you give the clerk the ability to do the role that they're required to do statutorily.
And would you suggest, Ms. Propp, that we do that prior to acting on the motion?
Yes.
All right. So, Mr. Vice Mayor, may we hold your motion in abeyance?
Yes.
Okay. And Ms. Propp, so we need to, I see number 9. Now, which two do you want us to do first?
Before the recommendations, starting with number 1, the paragraph before asks that the clerk administrator to read the title of the proposed ordinance, and you will find those proposed ordinances encompassed in recommendation number 7, which is to introduce the 5 ordinances, and the mayor should ask the clerk to read those titles.
Yes. I'm going to ask the clerk administrator to read the title of the proposed ordinances.
Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 29 of the Town Code by adding Division 5 to Article 8 of the Los Gatos Town Code entitled Affordable Housing Overlay Zone and designating 5 sites to which the affordable housing overlay shall be applied and adopting implementing regulations A-12-003. The overlay zone will be included in the 5 properties located at 110, 120, 130, 140, and 150 Knowles Drive. At 50 Los Gatos Saratoga Road, parcel 32. 50 Los Gatos Saratoga Road, parcel 1. 400 Blossom Hill Road, and 517 Blossom Hill Road.
And Madam Mayor, there's also recommendation number 10, which is the zoning code amendments. Did you read that as well? Okay, just making sure.
She has read those. Ms. Prop, I'm assuming that you want us, without a motion, to accept the Planning Commission's findings and recommendations in the form of meeting minutes on attachment 3?
That's correct.
All right, and now may we go forward with the Vice Mayor's motion?
Yes.
All right, so the Vice Mayor's motion has a motion on the table. Do we have a second? All right, we have a second by Mr. Przinski. A question of staff. I would like, I think it would be helpful for our documents to have the standards versus guidelines, shall versus should, made consistent and clear. How would the staff suggest I work this into the motion if I need to do that?
It could either be an amendment to the motion directing staff to make those changes, or directing staff to bring those changes back in written form at your December 2nd meeting. I will point out to council we already have 3 land use items tentatively scheduled for the December 2nd meeting.
All right, I would ask the maker of the motion to include in his motion a request directing staff, not a request, directing staff to make the changes that standardize standards versus guidelines, shall versus should.
I'll amend.
And Mr. Przinski?
Agreed.
All right, further discussion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody involved in this. We are now on other business, agenda item 5, called Information Report, Review of the Plan Development Overlay Zone. The staff report will be made by Sandy Bailey, Community Development Director. And Ms. Bailey, I believe, yes we do, we have a desk item on this also.
Yes, that is correct. There is a desk item on this matter. The desk item includes 1 correspondence from the public. It also notes that within Santa Clara County, there are only 2 cities and the county itself who do not utilize planned developments or other similar type of overlay zones. This matter is on your agenda tonight as the mayor has requested a conceptual discussion of planned developments to determine if there is council interest for staff to do additional research on planned developments or to consider potential changes to the town's utilization of planned developments. The report is just an information-only report, and it contains general information for council discussion. Once council has discussed this matter, staff is seeking direction, and we're available if you have any questions.
Do we have questions of staff? I did have one question, Ms. Bailey, and I believe it was answered in the desk item, but I'm not sure. Staff is asking for a definition, is suggesting that we need a better definition of infill. But as it relates to the plan development, decisions could be made on our plan development ordinance without dealing with infill. The issue is that in our infill ordinance, we make reference to plan development.
That is correct, and it's the infill policy that makes the reference to planned developments.
All right. Ms. Jensen.
I'd like to follow up on that. Because they're interrelated, I'm just looking at some of the issues with the infill, and I know that when we consider planned developments, particularly in the Planning Commission, and we cite sections of our code or ordinances or to support or reject a particular project, that often we're going to look at different sections, and often it's infill, which requires consistency with the surrounding neighborhood, et cetera, which is sometimes at odds with what's being proposed by planned development. So does it make sense for us to consider them separate and apart? Or if we get to the part where we're talking to staff about what's appropriate going forward, should we include any issues with the infill development policy?
The discussion tonight is related to planned developments, but we are looking at the infill policy in terms of community benefit, which is another topic which Council has been discussing, as well as planned developments. So Ms. Jensen is correct, there is some tie-ins. So we would seek direction on the infill policy as well. But the main focus tonight is to first focus on the planned developments.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, we do have individuals who have submitted cards. If you want to talk to us, testify on this item, please do submit a speaker card. First one, Ann Robinson.
Ann Robinson, 201 Charter Oak Circle. I guess I was expecting there to be discussion on planned developments. Is there going to be more, or is this just for us for the public to speak? Can you answer that?
Well, at this point, why don't you just go forward with your
Okay.
testimony, please?
I've lived and worked in Los Gatos for 20 years. I've been happy with what I saw being developed in town into the last few years. It started with Bluebird Lane. When I first went through this planned development, I thought, where are the yards? The street is so narrow. The houses are so close together. Then came Laurel Muse planned development with the back of the houses right on Los Gatos Boulevard. These are some of the comments I heard from friends, patients, and neighbors. Looks like neighbors will be able to shake hands from window to window. I can't believe they only projected 4 students for the Los Gatos schools from 22 large homes. How could Robeson think that this development was acceptable for Los Gatos? Who approved such a terrible development? I am appalled by the Laurel Muse development. It was the Laurel Muse planned development that got me thinking and looking, and I didn't have to look far because here came Albright, the largest planned development in Los Gatos history, backed by a $157 billion company with John Shank as a representative. How could you even think that a development of 4 4-story buildings on a 20-foot hill next to 1- and 2-story townhouses being compatible is beyond me. I don't understand how Council Members McNutt's, how she was not challenged after she made the statement that planned developments like Albright don't set a precedent for future developments because each development is evaluated on its own merit. This is not true. In the Albright EIR, the Netflix Aventino planned development was cited several times as a precedent for the Albright development. The Netflix Aventino planned development set the precedent for the Albright development. Both developments are not consistent with the general plan guidelines. The recent approvals of these just mentioned planned developments, Bluebird Lane, Laurel Muse, Netflix Aventino, and Albright, in my opinion, are ruining Los Gatos. The government of Los Gatos is failing to protect our quality of life in Los Gatos by abusing the use of the planned development overlay. In the future, I hope there are term limits of 4 to 5 years for town council members. I hope the planning commission, the town council will adhere to the general plan guidelines and fundamentals and not allow PDs to deviate from the general plan and zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack Van Naden.
Good evening, Mayor, Councilman. I hope that you see the need to further the review of the wording and the intent of the plan development. As you know, the Plan Development Overlay is a specially tailored development plan and ordinance which designates the zoning regulations for the projects, sets specific development standards, and ensures that zoning and general plan are consistent. Those are key words, consistent. Our 2020 general plan was a heavily labored project with a lot of community involvement, a general plan advisory committee, a general plan committee, community workshops, Mr. Larson and his staff, and a group of consultants. It was reviewed and approved by the then current town council, and I am sure that they also read through it thoroughly before signing it off. Within the general plan, there is a very distinct statement that is so clear I do not understand how that it could be misunderstood otherwise. In the land use element, there is a requirement that the buildings have a rigid standard not to exceed 35 feet. There's nothing ambiguous about that standard. There is no should nor shall to dispute. It is also stated in the plan development wording that the plan development must be consistent with the general plan. If we put so much time into thinking, discussing, and developing the general plan, why would anyone think that 35 feet and 65 feet are consistent? Yet 65 feet was approved at Albright. There are many in the community that simply don't understand the discrepancy. I'm perplexed myself by this, and this alone should be enough to make you want to rethink the plan development. I think the PD interpretation has been liberalized to expand well beyond its original intent. It needs to be tied down, and I think Los Gatos should take this opportunity to box in a clear definition of the plan development. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Lockridge.
My name is Jeff Lockridge, and I want to actually agree with both Mr. Venadas and Ms. Robinson's comments completely, because I don't have time to say all that. But ever since I've heard about the AHA's overlay zone, I've tried to educate myself on the concept of a zoning ordinance that essentially changes the underlying zone with something more favorable to the developer. The following quote is taken directly from the town documents. The purpose, quote, "The purpose of the PD, or Plan Development Overlay Zone, is to provide for alternative uses and developments more consistent with site characteristics that are allowed in other zones, and so create an optimum quantity and use of open space and encourage good design. The PD zone permits establishment of a single use or the integration of several uses not ordinarily possible if use and development is in compliance with the complete development plan, showing relationships of the use or uses to each other, to the district as a whole, and to surrounding areas," end quote. I would like someone to explain that to me in English, because that's what I see Los Gatos gets out of, so I can see what Los Gatos gets out of these plan developments. I can more easily see what the developers get out of them, but that's what scares me. The developers get something, but Los Gatos doesn't get anything out of these plan developments. There should be a substantial and obvious benefit to the town if we're being asked to make an exception to our general plan. How clear is our town's policy? Does it have inconsistencies throughout? It should make sense not only to the town staff, but to the residents as well. It seems like the wording is intentionally obtuse so that no one really can get pinned down to whether there should be a PD or not, or as to how it's applied. I've seen the PDs that were applied for and granted in the most recent developments in town. I have trouble seeing where they complied with what I thought I understood that the town policies were, and how the town benefit from it. I'd suggest that until the PD policy for the town of Los Gatos can be clearly spelled out and applied fairly and consistently, we shouldn't grant any more PDs. That's it.
Thank you. John Shepherdson, and this is the last card I have if you intend to speak on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor Spector. First, I want to thank you for raising this issue before the council and the community. I think it is very important, and needless to say, the issue has created a lot of contention and anger, bitterness, and divisiveness. And whatever side of the issue we are on particular projects, if the PD foments that kind of division, then that in itself, to me, warrants review. Otherwise, we don't learn from the division and bitterness, and then we continue to repeat it. The general plan, as I understand it, according to the law, is our constitution for land use. So constitution, in my view, is a powerful word. With respect to the Albright project, it was subject to a 35-foot maximum height limit, subject to rigid development standards. And so in my humble view, that I viewed that language as mandatory language that was not subject to discretion, absent the issue I raised earlier with AHAWS, that is a general plan amendment. The developer chose not to get a general plan amendment, and so put it before the council in that fashion. With a PD, what was first approved was 85 feet and then 65 feet. So clearly we exceeded the language that I viewed as mandatory in the general plan of 35 feet. What the developer then has publicly stated is that members of the community, including myself, are irresponsible for asking the courts to address this issue. You know, going to the courts is not a fun, easy thing to do, as well as being publicly criticized for being irresponsible. And yet, you know, where do you take a stand? So this is the project that we have taken that stand. You know, I don't understand how the language in the infill policy could have been used to justify the project. I don't see how it contributed to community, neighborhood unity, and I don't see how it was designed in the context of the surrounding neighborhood and zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry Arzi.
Good evening. You know, a number of you have expressed frustration with PDs publicly here in this chamber. I hope you take this opportunity to let loose and lambast it publicly. I understand there's 2 municipalities that don't use PDs. What's the matter with us? But we do things in the name of progress, and we haven't changed since the 1960s. My partner and I closed the Los Gatos Porch because of intensification in this community. It's impossible to operate a retail operation with the amount of intensity that has been going on. Swanson Ford, which is now the Fillmore Ghetto Project's twin sister, is a mess. And it will be even more so in 20 years from now. Just look at what's behind it, made out of plywood. I live next to a project, planned development, 3 units. I guess it was built in the 70s. We didn't have, it doesn't show up on your list of projects. They've filled in pavement for cars to park on. They've moved their fences to the street forward. What used to be no children is now practically a basketball team living there. We can't continue this. You have to do something about it.
Thank you. Maria Risto.
Hi, Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. Pretty much all the speakers before me have said everything. I just want to reinforce from the viewpoint as a resident and a parent in this town. I know everybody standing in front of me lives here. I just feel like whenever I hear PD, I know that there's an awful lot of plan developments that I'm not aware of because they were done well, but I feel like the ones in the last several years that stick out are things that feel like aberrations to the fabric of the town of Los Gatos. And this morning I was at Fisher Middle School for a really wonderful Veterans Day ceremony, and I was enjoying the time, but walking in there, I had to pass a plan development that seems to be the thorn in the side of so many parents at Fisher, because as I walk by there, I see people going, oh my gosh, you can step from one roof to the next. Oh my gosh, where are the cars going? And I feel like it's really difficult to get people who are unhappy to come to these council meetings. And I realize that all of you know that there are problems here, but it's hard to get people to email or write a letter or show up, which is frustrating to me. But I feel like I'm reflecting the views of at least 50 people I talked to this morning that are really unhappy with our latest plan developments. And I'm glad you're taking a look at this. I hope it can be defined better, and I hope that plan developments have to come into be used as something that enhances the community and embraces what was put into the general plan, which was done with a huge amount of effort, thought, energy, and sort of stands for where the town should be going. And it feels like some of these plan developments are end runs around what's been established. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more card, Beverly Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Beverly Bryant. I live at Placer Oaks Road 16940. And ironically, I must tell you, I live on the same street as the Swanson Ford development. I'm very pleased with it. I testified actually in favor of it, simply because I think it uses the land at the end of my street in a very effective way. It is a planned development. It was thoughtfully retained by this council and reviewed by this council, and it permitted the land to be used quite wisely. I think in the whole Bay Area, we're looking for more ability to use our land wisely. If you think of the Los Gatos Hotel development, which is planned development, as well as the Summerhill project out at Union, those are examples of the town thoughtfully considering what it should do and using planned development. So I encourage you to keep this policy and to use it wisely and make it available to people to use, because I'm personally happy not to have the Swanson dealership or an empty lot there, and have a good place where I hopefully can take my family to a restaurant, and also know that there will be families available to live there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now this is my last card. Matthew Daly. And please, if you want to speak, turn in a speaker card to the clerk over here.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I bought a house here about 5 years ago. I think we all live in Los Gatos for pretty much the same reasons. And it's a great town. I grew up in San Jose, and I was happy to be able to afford to move to Los Gatos. And I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so we bought a house that is walking distance to all 3 of the primary schools, elementary, junior high, and high school. It happens to be right by the Los Gatos Lodge. So I just want to formally protest the idea of putting high-density housing in a place where I can only imagine gridlock, a less safe experience walking to school, which is our goal, and overfilling our schools. I just wanted to speak out against that.
Thank you. All right, that's the last card. Does anyone else here wish to address us on this agenda item? Noting that no one is coming forward, I will close the public hearing portion of our agenda item and look to the council members for questions, discussion, motions. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for bringing this item onto our agenda. As a member of the Planning Commission from 1989 to 1999, and then again from, I think, 2006 to 2012, I've seen many plan developments, and I saw how they began. And Ms. Bryant, thank you for bringing up the Summerhill project on Union and Blossom Hill, and for the Los Gatos Hotel. The Summerhill project was worked on extensively for years and years and years, and it's a very good example of what a plan development should be. The Planning Commission and Town Council were able to keep 85% of the ridge line in that property for open space. We put orchard trees. We set the houses on the lot, which is a hillside lot, in a thoughtful way. And that is what the plan development is supposed to be used for. So, Mr. Lockridge, you said you wanted it in English. If I look at the code section, I see provide alternative uses and developments more consistent with site characteristics than allowed in other zones, and so create an optimum quantity and use of open space and encourage good design. And I'd point you to the Summerhill project, because when you have a difficult lot that can't be laid out in a grid, it makes sense to be creative in how you use the land and preserve open space. And that's how I understand that plan developments are supposed to be used. As I sat on plan development or planning commission for the next many years, it came to the point where the plan development was skewed to be 40,000 acres of flat land that should be developed in a grid because it's in a zone for whatever it is, and the plan development came to be used as a jigsaw puzzle to get around the zoning requirements and put as many things as you could put on the lot. That is not the way it was intended to be used, as I understand it. It's unfortunately the way it has been used. So I would strongly encourage this council to direct the staff to come back with different ideas about plan development or eliminate it altogether. I think it does have a place when used, as Anheuser-Busch says, a healthful product when used responsibly. So plan development is a healthy kind of thing when used responsibly, but I don't think we've used it responsibly. I think we've just allowed people to come in and put as many things as they can. And by doing that, we've greatly impacted our infrastructure such that when we get on Los Gatos Boulevard, now we are feeding 22 houses, another 22 houses. You can put your hand out and touch the other. Now, maybe someone wants to live that way. Obviously, they're selling, but I don't think that's what the intent of the plan development is. So it's unfortunate that it's being used that way and that it's being skewed. That's why I think the infill development policy needs to be looked at in conjunction with it. And in particular, I'm concerned about, it says on page 3, at the bottom, it uses the phrase, quote, underutilized property, unquote. So I was thinking about, well, what is that? Is that Los Gatos Honda when it closes down? Is that because I bought a convalescent hospital and I can do something else with it? What makes something, quote, underutilized? Or it's a vacant lot where someone couldn't fit 2 houses on it, so called it condos. So I would like us to re-examine the entire concept. I know that that's complicated and difficult, but just for some suggestions from me, the infill policy and the plan development policy, I think, ought to be integrated. I think they ought to be integrated into the language that we work so hard to get to in the general plan. I think that the plan development really should be used for a difficult lot, as opposed to we have space and let's put something in there regardless of what the zoning is. And I think, unfortunately, by that we've also created little islands of balkanized states on Los Gatos Boulevard. And what we really need to be doing is doing thoughtful design that preserves the character of the community and the neighborhoods, and as it says in the infill policy, actually integrate with the surrounding community. And unfortunately, the plan developments lately haven't done that. They've created their own entity. So I would like us to see us kind of take this from the ground up and start back with the concept of using it for difficult lots to optimize open space and good design. So that's my input on it.
Thank you. Further discussion? Mr. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Just to continue on with what Councilmember Jensen started with, I would like to see some minimum standards developed for setbacks, for lot sizes within these planned developments, for street sizes. I think the idea or what has been going on is kind of like you do take a level parcel that was previously used for commercial or whatnot, and it becomes almost a free-for-all what's inside of there. It's not to see how many properties we can cram into one space, single-family homes. It should be more like the way the rest of the town had grown up, with setbacks and floor area ratios and some minimum standards moving forward. And that would be my input, especially when it applies to single-family residences.
Thank you. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you, Major Mayor. Procedural question for staff, because the plan development is defined in the general plan. We always begin and end with the general plan. So if we are talking about wanting to look at the definition of plan development in the general plan, would that not start with the general plan committee and work its way through? And do we need to differentiate between changing or tightening up that language versus just general unhappiness of how it's been applied? So I'm hearing two different things, and I think it's going to be important to keep those two things separated in the discussion, because you have a definition which may or may not be what the community now wants, but how that definition was applied is a separate thing. How it was applied, how those judgments were made by the majority of council, it's done. How do we, from a procedural point of view, tackle this, and would it not start with a general plan, and how do you keep that conversation clean and separated?
Ultimately, this is up to the council to decide what changes, if any, they want to consider with the PD. If there were to be any changes to the general plan language that was previously approved by council regarding PDs, then that would definitely have to go back to the general plan committee and then the planning commission and then to the council to be implemented. What we've been asked to bring forward to you tonight is just a simple introductory piece on PDs with some limited research we were able to do before ascertaining what interest, if any, the council had in exploring possible changes to the PD. So I believe the array of options before you tonight could be to look at implementation standards and guidelines for the planning commission and council to use existing with the existing framework. 2, changes to the general plan, changes to the zoning ordinance, changes to the infill policy, and beyond. It's really kind of a blank canvas we're bringing to you to understand what the council's interest may be, if any, in terms of changes to the town's utilization of PDs. Obviously, any PD approved by town goes through the planning commission and then the council. But if the council wishes to impose additional standards, criteria, guidelines, whatever, the nature of those changes, as you have your policy discussion, will drive what the process is, whether it's going to be a general plan amendment, an ordinance amendment, or a policy change.
Further discussion? Mr. Brzezinski?
I want to thank staff for the very thorough analysis of PD, because we've tossed this around for a long time, and we've kind of found one little piece of the general plan that we refer to all this time. But what I see here is a very complete overview of what the plan development concept is supposed to deliver. I also appreciated the fact that when you look at the audit of the 70-plus plan developments that have been created in town since the mid-'60s, right up to the present, and evaluating that on the map of the town. If you look at the map and then you identify each of those sites as a particular project, and then take a look at them. I don't think that you're going to find a significant number of these that do not reflect town character. I think if you look at them, and I challenge you to look at them, okay? Take out the map, look at them, drive around, see what they look like, okay? And see which ones you would say violate the character of the town. And I would challenge you to hear your response, because as I look at it, and it's been a long history of this development orientation. Have mistakes been made? For sure. Have mistakes been made with projects that fulfill all of our specific language expectations of height, setbacks, etc.? Yeah, there have been mistakes there too. It's called architecture. To me, I really think the town is a beautiful place. People I talk to are pretty positive. I don't think we have any problem getting people who, as Ms. Risto indicated, who are unhappy to come out, okay? Because I think there's a diversity and a difference of opinion in this town about what's working and what's not. I can identify one particular building that was not a planned development that sticks out like a sore thumb on Blossom Hill and Boulevard. And, I look at that and I think, well, I'm sure glad I was on the Planning Commission when that building was built. But from my purposes, I would look through this and I say, it's not the issue of plan development. It's the issue of application of general plan or plan development in the general plan context. That's what we have to deal with. And so if there are mistakes made, we should admit to mistakes. If there are issues that need to be addressed, we address them as the issues come up. But I don't think embedded in plan development is the natural negative consequences that I think a couple of developments have kind of triggered in our perceptions. So I would say this to staff: let's take a look at tightening up the language. Let's take a look at how it's applied. Let's also take a look at the advantages that were offered as a body, both Planning Commission and Council, as a body to be able to make decisions that may be a little bit more creative on occasion, okay? That may actually produce what we're asking for, which is more open space or a better design element or whatever. But I think that's where we need to look at is back to ourselves, not only this council, but previous planning commissions and councils that have approved various things that we may not find acceptable. And I would say that's the tough part, is making sure when we get to the actual decisions, that those decisions are based on things that we can point to as really benefiting the community. So I'm not so inclined to ask for wholesale reevaluation, but I am inclined to say, let's take a look at how we apply and understand and interpret and be more conscientious about the next phases that would occur as we look at a plan development down the road.
Thank you. Question of staff and then a comment. Ms. Bailey, you had said recently that the planned developments do not allow for a greater density on the property. That's correct, isn't it?
That's correct.
But they would allow for deviations from the ordinance, such as less setbacks, those kinds of things. I think you have it on your staff report.
Setbacks, FAR, parking, numerous types of development standards.
All right, thank you. When I first read the staff report, my thought was, let's just get rid of planned developments. And that was the position from which I started my thinking and analysis. But I'm going to predate Ms. Jensen. I was on the Planning Commission from 1980 to 88. And at that time, and I actually thought we got the planned development originally at that time. Apparently, even was before then. But I was very happy to have the planned development as a tool for our development in the hillside, because what that allowed us to do was to take a a piece of property, let's say 10 acres, in the hillsides, and let's say they were all 1 acre lots, and rather than have one house on the hillside 10 times, 10 homes, it allowed us to bring those homes down and cluster them more closely down so you wouldn't see them marring the entire hillside. So, with that memory, it made me focus or reflect on the fact that there are instances where I think the plan development can be helpful. So I started with let's just get rid of it, then moved to it's helpful, so we shouldn't totally get rid of it. Then I looked at our actual language in the zone, and the first, I think it's the first sentence, where it references optimum quantity and use of open space and good design. That sentence, to me, was fine. The second sentence, I don't know who spoke about it, didn't make any sense to me either. The general plan, once I focused on it, was far too general and didn't give enough direction. So as I sit up here right now, I am not prepared to totally eliminate the plan development. I'm certainly prepared to entertain a revision of the zoning ordinance to tighten it up, possibly even to leave it at its first sentence or some facsimile thereof, and definitely to tighten up and revise the general plan language. Further discussion. Ms. Jensen.
Just to follow up on what the mayor indicated, it may be appropriate to have a plan development available in certain zones. So, for example, where there truly is a difficult lot in the hillside, and as Mayor Spector indicated, there is an advantage, as at Summerhill Homes, to keep houses off the ridge line and off the hills and create the open space. But what we have now has become so amorphous and subject to all kinds of interpretation that anyone can do anything. So I would suggest perhaps even looking at limiting plan developments to particular zones, such that where you're, for example, on Los Gatos Boulevard and have a flat 40,000 square foot lot, it doesn't strike me that that presents a difficulty of design in getting to a particular, staying within the zoning that's already there, because we have zoning rules in place. So it doesn't make sense to say, well, on a flat lot of 40,000 square feet, this is a difficult lot. It's not. So there's really no reason to go outside of the regulations that we already have in place for residential design, for setbacks, for whatever it is, such that because it's been used as an example, Bluebird Lane or Laurel Mews, you end up with 22 houses where if you stuck with regular zoning at Bluebird Lane, you'd have 7. And you could have put a grid pattern in, but that would not have optimized the use of the property for the developer. And unfortunately, I think that's what we've ended up doing, optimizing the use of the property for the developer rather than optimizing the use of the property for the town. And so we've created bad impacts that way. So perhaps, yes, I agree with the mayor, perhaps not jettisoning it altogether, but maybe considering it in very limited circumstances for, in fact, difficult property.
Further discussion. Mr. Brzezinski.
I think the issue of infill needs to be more fully explored as well. And I think when it's characterized as underutilized, that doesn't necessarily mean maximize the intensification of use. It says this may be a property that has worn out. And from the perspective of how we're going to deal with that, we're pretty much all infill now. I mean, it would almost be easier to define what isn't infill than what is, because we are a fully built-out community. And except for, let's say, the area of North 40, pretty much everything else is going to fit, any development takes place, is going to fit into the category of infill. And with that because, you know, we're doing a great job of protecting our hills, I do believe. And with the concept of infill, if we define it better, then what needs to be defined is how does this proposal enhance the community by rehabilitating a property that is currently not, you know, not actually a contributor, but is more something that is a blight on the land. And with that in mind, you know, if we can help define that, that would be, I think, a really good idea. I also think it'd be appropriate for us to spend some time with staff talking about how we interpret applications made by developers for the purpose of plan development. And I think it's at the front end where we need to be doing most of our work, where we can say, all right, let's sit down and say, how does this really contribute? Those things that you're asking us to, in some ways, adjust, what's the value of the adjustment? What is the gain of the community? What's the benefit to the community? Not like community benefit as we're trying to define it for ourselves, but what's the benefit of this particular project for the community? Which population of the community does it serve in a better way, such as the senior population or an affordable housing concept? But those are the things I think we need to be discussing at the front end, and perhaps it'd be a good idea for the staff and council, maybe staff, council, and planning commission, to sit together and talk about how do we, from the very first application that comes in, how do we define what's going to be beneficial to us as we move forward with this proposal under plan development.
Further discussion? Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Excuse me again. As I read the existing infill policy, it says an infill project should be designed in context with the neighborhood and surrounding zoning with respect to the existing scale and character of surrounding structures. Provide comparable lot sizes and open space, consider garage placement setbacks, density, provide adequate circulation and on-street parking. The infill development should blend rather than compete with established character of the area. And that is pretty much the opposite of what a Laurel Muse type development is, what comes to mind when I think of that. So moving forward, I would think trying to look at the infill and including that language with whatever PDs come forward, and look at things like minimum setbacks for single-family homes and garage placement and lot sizes and that kind of thing would be what I'd like to see.
Further discussion? Question of staff. Let's just say, for the sake of discussion, that this council wants to go forward with some type of modification to an existing ordinance or general plan or policy. I'm thinking through the process. One process I see is just referring this back to staff. Another process I see is referring it to an ad hoc committee to work with staff. Does staff have any recommendations with regard to those two possibilities or any other possibility?
The other options that leap to mind would be a joint planning commission council study session, as we have done previously over the years, and we do have the council's typical January, February retreat coming up, which might create an opportunity for that discussion. Another option, since general plan amendment has been specifically referenced as the mayor's preference, and I believe also followed up by Councilwoman Jensen, to start with the general plan committee would be an additional process. So I think you have four options. What I actually start at is what I heard a majority of the council express interest in considering, which, one, clearly dealing with some of the infill policy ambiguities and links to the PD. I've heard 3 members of council express interest in that work product as recommended by staff. I heard many different variations of trying to tighten up the standards for when a PD is used, and that could be achieved through tightening up the general plan language. It could be achieved by tightening up The zoning code language, both of those have been suggested during your discussion, could be achieved by a policy for Planning Commission and Council consideration on standards and criteria for PDs, for evaluating PD proposals. A variety of approaches to use in that. What I would recommend is, I think the specificity of what the council is asking for is a little bit vague, but it all generally moves in the direction of tightening up when PDs are applied to make sure there's a clear demonstrable benefit to the community. And I think we could engage that discussion at the Planning Commission Council retreat. I have some interest in, because I still think it's a general discussion rather than getting to words to change. I will highlight on one specific item that came up. We did have prior council direction that the reuse of any of the automobile lots should be considered as a PD. So that's why some of those have come forward as PDs, was prior council direction that they be considered as PDs when there's any reuse. That's one issue I think may be clear. There's time for a different council direction on that matter. Not that there's many lots left, but still, it's an old policy that I've heard a majority of the council expressed comment on.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. I kind of like the idea that Mr. Larson pointed out about the ad hoc committee as a way of addressing this moving forward.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen.
I actually favor the idea of starting with a joint session with Planning Commission, because would give us an opportunity to talk with the people that deal with this most. Although the town council certainly has dealt with it a lot recently, but it allows for an open discussion that can then be focused, and so I would favor that option as a starting point, though I don't think an ad hoc committee after that, if it were more specified, would be a bad idea. It may be a good idea.
Mr. Brzezinski.
I want to agree with Councilwoman Jensen that it's too early to seat an ad hoc committee. I think we do have to do some dialogue with the Planning Commission together with Council to bring us to some kind of unanimity in what we see that we like and what we see that we don't. But I also want to make sure that we're engaged with the planning staff at that same time. I know we've done retreats in the past, joint retreats, where we actually did simulations and worked through proposals together to see how we as planning commissioners or council would react as if we were staff, and give us a chance to actually be a little bit more objective and concrete in how we would evaluate proposals coming in front of us. And then at that point, I think we can determine whether or not we've got enough unanimity to go to an ad hoc committee.
Question of staff. I'm not necessarily supportive of having this start with the Planning Commission Council. However, there is enough interest on this council that I would ask staff, when do you anticipate the soonest we could have this joint meeting to be?
That's a good question. We would have to look at the work plan. The earliest I could see it even being scheduled would be as part of the council's retreat that typically occurs late January, early February. What staff work and prep could be done by that point in time will be contingent on the other items on staff's work plan. And we would certainly get as far as we could for that discussion. Hearing council comment about both an ad hoc committee as well as a joint discussion, it might be staff could use the general plan committee, which includes 3 planning commissioners and 2 councils, to help frame the joint session and what would be a productive way to move that ahead. So we have planning commission and council involvement in framing that joint study session. Not the substance, the process. What are the issues that would be brought forward.
Further discussion? Ms. Jensen?
That actually changes my analysis a little bit because I would like to see this go forward faster rather than slower. My interest in the Planning Commission Town Council was that we could get input from everyone. The General Plan Committee, I appreciate, has Town Council and Planning Commissioners, but I'm afraid that it gets so focused that it may not be productive. So I don't know, I wouldn't want to do both. I'd want to choose one and be able to bring it forward.
All right, Mr. Vice Mayor.
I agree with Councilmember Jensen and Councilmember Brzezinski that maybe we should begin with the Planning Commission Council joint meeting and then go from there.
Further discussion? Mr. Brzezinski?
Just curious, question of staff. Do we have any planned developments in the pipeline?
Yes.
Yes, there's 3 on your list that shows pending, 3 pending PD applications.
That's what I thought.
And see, that's one of that's one of my concerns. I think the policy decision or direction needs to come from the council, not necessarily the General Plan Committee, not necessarily the Planning Commission. And with 3 PDs currently in the pipeline, with others that I'm sure will be coming forward because basically everything does come forward as a PD. I don't think it is a good idea at this point to delay the process as much as a general plan, planning commission, council will do. And that was my concern with the suggestions that have been coming back and forward.
Leaving staff workload off the table and knowing that we would have to manage and juggle priorities and projects, just looking at the council schedule, November 18th is already a set agenda. The first meeting in December already has 3, now maybe 4 land use cases on it. Certainly one of those would bump to your second meeting of December, and that's typically when we do council and commission appointments. And I think there's something else from PC, an appeal from PC that we've just received that we're under a legal deadline to hear that on December 16th, unless and CUP complaints are coming back that night as well. So then that kicks us to the new year, I think, for council to get back to this issue. You do have the option of special meetings. The 9th you have already tentatively booked for board and commission interviews. So the 3 Mondays of December prior to holiday week are kind of booked. We'd need to be looking at another night of the week. Or in January, we typically do not meet the first meeting of the new year because it falls in close proximity to the new year. So we could look at scheduling a separate meeting. That's also the time we sometimes look for the council retreat. It could also just be a retreat discussion for the council, not involving the planning commission. If I could ask Ms. Bailey, the timing on these pending cases to go to planning commission, is it weeks, months?
It's fairly soon. 2 of them are going through environmental review right now. I believe they're going through the 45-day review period, or whatever the review period is. So those are pending, very close to going to a planning commission public hearing.
All right. Again, that's my concern. Mr. Brzezinski.
My assumption is, I mean, these 3 projects need to go forward given our legal parameters. But I would assume from tonight's discussion that without having confirmed or reevaluated in some kind of more legislative fashion, there is enough issue raised that the staff will be scrutinizing these perhaps a little bit more strenuously than we would ordinarily. Is that the case?
I think that's a fair assessment at all 3 levels of review that will occur. All three of these are discretionary legislative acts ultimately by the council upon recommendation of the Planning Commission. And I think this discussion tonight could inform not only staff's work, the Planning Commission's work, but also how this council evaluates those three when they come forward, because they are completely at the council's discretion. Whether or not you change any word in the general plan, any word in the zoning ordinance, or any word in the infill policy.
That was my assumption. Thank you.
Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Larson, which scenario for process will bring this back before the council and the public the fastest? Would that be the council retreat discussion?
I believe so. Obviously, if the council just wanted to schedule this discussion to let it ripen and further and have thoughts crystallize to direction, just scheduling another meeting of the council on this matter might move the process even more quickly. If the council's looking for additional staff work and research and guidance, we would just need some time to get that back to you. And I think the retreat in late January, typically occurs late January or early February, is the earliest we could do that.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion, and I am reserving the issue of an ad hoc committee. So I am not. The motion will not include that, but neither will it eliminate that as a possibility. I'm going to move that we refer to town staff consideration or review of the following: of our zoning ordinance 2980080, to review that zoning ordinance in terms of specificity, specifically using the first sentence as guidance, and the second sentence as something that is probably superfluous language. Secondly, that we look at the ordinance regarding infill and clarify any vagaries in that ordinance. That we review the wording of the general plan regarding plan development and definitely tighten that language consistent with the first sentence of the zoning ordinance, and that we consider the PD for use in specified zones. That is a motion. Ms. Jensen.
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Madam,
Yes.
before you adjourn, I did have one comment I wanted to make, not related to that item.
Okay. Good. You don't make us do that again.
No, and you quickly moved to adjourn, so I had to jump in. The Vice Mayor did ask a question earlier when we were discussing AOZs that we didn't address prior to moving into motion and action, and I did just want to clarify. On page 12 of the Planning Commission staff report, under general plan amendment, we did explicitly list that it was in the technical appendix for the housing element, which is part of the general plan. We listed the AHA's sites that were previously considered by council last January, and so the only general plan amendment before you that you already approved was simply to change that technical appendix to delete 4 of those prior sites and add the 4 that you approved tonight. And that's explained on page 12 of the Planning Commission staff report.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Larson, and the meeting is adjourned.